Good afternoon. Lovely to see you. Thank you for coming to spend some time with me. There are so many wonderful things you could be doing on this fabulous ship, including doing nothing at all. How many here are fans of doing nothing at all? Me too. But if you see me around the ship doing nothing at all, please stop by, say hello, introduce yourselves, because making new friends, getting to know people, I think is one of the loveliest parts about the cruise experience. I am Melinda Bates, also known as the Ultimate White House Insider, courtesy of the 8 amazing years I spent as a special assistant to the president and director of the White House Visitors Office. I am, in fact, the first person to do that work for all 8 years of any administration. So while the president and the first lady, President Clinton, First Lady Hillary Clinton, were making history on the national and international stage, I made a little history in the House itself. I fell in love with the White House. It was just the most exciting time in my life. As you can imagine, on the last day in the Oval Office, the president said to me, "Melinda, it has been a hell of a ride, and I'm so glad you came along for the whole deal." And I really was too. It was absolutely a fabulous experience. Well, we all went our separate ways afterwards, and I'm from the Washington area. I stayed home. I did a variety of other things, but for years, people, including Oprah Winfrey, who sat on the love seat in my office, said to me, "Melinda, you have all these great stories. You need to write a book." So I did. I wrote a book. It's called White House Story. Conveniently, it's my memoir, my story of life and work in America's House. And I was able to bring a few of these for you. They are available in the shop on 8, where I will go after my talk to sign them if you're interested. I would have brought more, but I had to pack them in one of my suitcases, so I had to decide shoes, books, shoes, books, shoes. So I hope I see you up there. So my topics throughout the cruise are all related to different aspects of White House social history. And I will begin today with my own story, which begins, as stories often do, long, long ago and far, far away. And when I say long ago, I mean, you don't think I took myself too seriously, do you? That's my Triumph Daytona 500, went like the wind, sounded like a 747 accelerating. It was, imagine how much my neighbors love that. I loved that bike. So that was, wait for it, 1964. Anybody here besides me remember 1964? Bless your hearts. And when I say far, far away, I mean Georgetown University, which is where I found myself on a bright September morning, wandering around the campus, dazed, confused, overwhelmed. Do I have the right books? Where's my next class? Where's the cafeteria? And the most important question of all for a young woman of 18, how am I going to make friends here? Because my family is from DC. I didn't live in a dorm, I didn't have roommates, I didn't know how I was going to meet people and make friends. And into my confusion stepped a tall, skinny kid with a big head of curly hair, stuck out his hand and said, "Hi, I'm Bill Clinton, I'm running for freshman class president." Well, I'm from Washington. I had never heard an accent like that, and like some of you, I was tempted to laugh. But fortunately, my head said to me, "Oh, wait, don't laugh. If you talk to this boy, you will know somebody." So we talked for about 10 minutes about school politics. I had no interest in school politics, but I was very interested in making a friend. And then I had a very unusual experience. In fact, the first and only time in my life, my head and my heart spoke to me and said, "This boy is an amazing person who is going to do something really important with his life. I can't wait to see what that will be." So essentially, when we were both 18, I knew he was going to be president someday. We became friends. I took my friend Bill to his first Judy Collins concert. Everybody knows he fell in love with her music and that he and Hillary named their daughter Chelsea after one of Judy Collins' most famous songs. We went to the same classes, parties, polo games and stuff. He was a great friend. I'm grateful to the Jesuits for my excellent education. And after school, he went off to Oxford and Yale and then back home to Arkansas for his political career. I stayed in my hometown of Washington, D.C., where I got married, had 2 children. And then in 1985, I found myself with a brand new job at our National Gallery of Art, where on my very first day on the job, I met these 2 people. Everybody know who this is? Charles and Diana, Prince and Princess of Wales. At the time, the 2 most famous people on the planet, and they had come to the National Gallery to open a special exhibition, Treasure Houses of Britain. There were about 12 of us put off in a holding room. No one told us what we were waiting for. We watched them come into the gallery on a monitor, cut a ribbon, go into the exhibit. Next thing we knew, the door opened, and the director walked in with his guests, and they walked up to me. And the prince began a conversation with me. Did I think the exhibition would enhance tourism to Britain? As if my opinion meant anything to anybody. Yes, sir, I'm confident that it will. Well, how will they know where to go? Oh, sir, we have the guidebooks from the treasure houses in the little bookshop at the end of the exhibit. Now, we had about a 5-minute conversation. And I knew perfectly well that the night before at the Reagan White House, there had been a very fancy dinner. And that very important people had been at that dinner, and they had gone through a receiving line where they got, hello, how are you, move on, hello, how are you, move on. And I had a 5-minute conversation. This was thrilling to me. Also because I knew that the press had been following the royals everywhere they went and had been interviewing people standing behind snow fence 3 blocks away from whatever the activity was, looking at the royals through binoculars, and I had a conversation. So I thought, when I go out into the atrium, I'm going to be interviewed, I'm going to be on the nightly news, it's going to be so exciting. I should say here that she was still very shy and did not speak, but she was the single most beautiful human being I've ever laid eyes on. Her hair was not blonde, her hair was gold. Her skin was porcelain. She was so lovely. Well, sadly for me, when the royals left the gallery, they got in their car and they went out to the countryside for an activity, and when they left, the press all followed them. So when I went out to the atrium, there was no one left to interview me. I was devastated. I had to resort to telephoning 200 of my closest friends to say, you will never guess who I just met. And I think I'm really going to like visitor services. And I did. I loved being at the gallery, and I stayed there for quite a while. But eventually there were no special exhibitions for me, and I went and got a job doing special services events at Macy's, an American department store. In 1992, my friend Bill finally made the announcement we had all been waiting for. He was going to run for president, which he had been preparing for since probably kindergarten. And I wanted to work on the campaign. I believed in him. I believed in his agenda for America, but I could not leave my job and my family to go to Little Rock to work. So a bunch of us, classmates and friends in Washington, formed a committee. We met in a friend's law offices. We did all kinds of things to raise support and raise money. And people forget that in 1992, most Americans had never heard of Governor Bill Clinton from Arkansas. Who does anything about Arkansas? I mean, I would call people and they'd say, who are you calling for? We put on events. This was a beautiful dinner in a mansion overlooking the Severn River in Annapolis. It was just, and if I could sell you a ticket to this dinner with the Democratic candidate for president of the United States for $250, I was over the moon. Now, in today's politics, that is chump change, but at the time, it was pretty exciting. We worked for an entire year, and then finally it's election day. And I do remember going to my community center in my neighborhood, and I do remember going into the booth and looking at the ballot. I remember seeing the name there of a person I had known since we were both 18, someone I admired, and just, so much respected, and really wanted him to be president. And I remember putting my finger on the button next to his name. I do not remember any of the rest of the day. Here's an overused word, surreal. I promise you, this genuinely was a surreal experience to vote for someone I had known for so long. Went home, and then that night there was an election watch party. We watched the returns come in, and oh my goodness, he won. He was going to be president. We were over the moon. The next day, I got up, I was off work, and for the very first time in a year, thought to myself, I have loved working for candidate Clinton. I wonder if there's something I could do for President Clinton to help with his agenda, but I couldn't imagine what it would be because I assumed, as I think many people do, that surely everyone who works at the White House must be either a foreign or domestic policy expert or an attorney or a numbers cruncher. I am not any of those things, so I couldn't imagine what could I possibly do. So I thought, I'll have to find something. Where did we go in the dark days before the interwebs to get information? Anybody? libraries. There you go, libraries. So I took myself to the Arlington County Central Library, where I found a book that Washingtonians refer to as the Plum Book, because it lists all the plum jobs that a president gets to fill when a new administration comes to town. I opened the book and I found a page that listed Executive Office of the President. That sounded promising. There were 10 positions listed: the title of the job, the name of the person on the job, and that person's phone number. And one of those titles was Director, White House Visitors Office, Janet Johnson, and a phone number. Now, again, I'm a Washington native. I had never visited the White House, had no idea the White House had a visitor's office, but there it was in front of me. And I looked at it and I thought, gee, I wonder if what Miss Janet Johnson does at the White House is similar to what I have done at the National Gallery. And obviously, the easiest way to find out would be to call her, because her phone number was right there. I'm a tender-hearted person. And I couldn't help but think about the fact that just the night before, the American people had shoved her boss, George Herbert Walker Bush, out of office. He'd be leaving. She'd be leaving what I assumed was the most exciting job of her life. And I thought, oh, if I call this woman, it'd just be sort of cruel to do that right away. I don't know if I can do that. I'll photocopy this page, I'll take it home, and I'll think about it. And that's what I did. The next day I returned to work at Macy's, and there were all kinds of messages on my phone from people calling in response to ads we had run for women's fashion, men's fashion, children's event. And you know how you do in any office. You listen to the messages, you write down the name and the phone number, and then you start returning calls, right? That's what I was doing. I was standing up and I was making calls, and I dialed a number, and this is what I heard. White House Visitor's Office. I'm returning a call from Janet Johnson. We'll see if the director is available. The next thing I knew, I was speaking to the director of the White House Visitor's Office. So we spoke for a few minutes about the event, and then I said to her, Miss Johnson, I used to be an exhibition supervisor at the National Gallery, and I wonder if what I did there is similar to what you do at the White House. Would you mind telling me about it? Oh, sure, she said, and she started to give me all kinds of information about what the visitor's office did, and I was frantically taking notes. At the end of the conversation, I said, thank you, it's been kind of you. I hope under the circumstances my questions have not upset you or offended you. And she laughed and she said, no, it's fine now. If you come and take my job from me, I won't like that, but there's nothing I can do about that, is there? And she laughed and hung up. And I sat down because my knees were shaking. And I thought, oh my, there is a job I'm perfect for. How am I going to get it? Now, I was smart enough to know I needed a resume. I had never written a resume, but I came up with a resume, printed up 20 copies. A friend took them to the transition office in Little Rock, and I sat back to wait. Waited through the rest of November, not a word. Through December, one of the only Christmases I have no recollection of, because at that point, I had become absolutely consumed with my job. It had become somehow, heart and soul, this was my job. I just knew that it was my job. I was just waiting for them to recognize it and call me, but they didn't. Now it's January, now it's inauguration time. Well, I was on somebody's list, got all these beautiful invitations, but no call about my job. It was the night of the, if you get a chance to go to an inauguration for someone you support and admire, you should go. Washington weather in January can be pretty awful, but it is very exciting and wonderful thing to see someone you like and admire stand up and take that oath of office. And the city is full of optimism and hope. It's just a wonderful experience. And here we are going to an inauguration night. And, I look kind of happy, but if you really look at my eyes, I look like my dog and my best friend have died. Because now he is president, and no one has called me, and I'm not happy about this. The next day, I was home from work, and my husband and I were watching on television. The Clintons hosted their very first public event, and it was an open house at the White House. People sent in postcards, and if your postcard was selected, you could come to the White House, walk up the driveway, come into the diplomatic reception room, shake hands with the new president, the vice president, Hillary and Tipper, and then walk through the house. And we were watching, and an aide came and whispered in Hillary's ear. And Hillary went and whispered in the president's ear, but she forgot that he was mic'd. So the whole world heard her say to him, there's a big mess out at the gates. People who should not have gotten in did. People who should have gotten in did not get in. It looks like we screwed all these people. Could have been worse, I suppose. My husband turned to me and said, what's going on? Why haven't they called you? If you were there, this would be running flawlessly. So this is my opportunity to confess to you that I then spoke to him in a tone of voice I am sure none of you have ever used with a person you care about, but I was upset. And so I said, I don't know why they haven't called me, and I am upset about it and don't want to hear about it anymore. Thank you, honey. 20 minutes later at my house, the phone rang. Hello, yes, I'm calling from the White House. Oh, yes, now I'm calling about the job of director of the visitor's office. Oh, because I'm literally speechless at this point. Now, have you interviewed for this job? Nope. No, I haven't. Oh, that's odd. Have you spoken to anyone about this job? Nope, I have not. Oh, she said, it's the strangest thing. I have not been told to interview you. I have been told you are the person for this job and we need to get you in here right away. And that's how I got my job. Yeah, because I've been telling that story since it happened, and I promise you I have goosebumps up here. It's just unbelievable how the universe just swung open a door for me. So we agreed that I would show up in 2 days at the White House, and here I am getting ready to go. I was so nervous. My hands were shaking. I couldn't put on eye makeup. I would have poked my eye out. The lipstick kept going everywhere. Wipe it off, put it back on again. And then I got in my car and realized, but wait, where is it? Here's a clue. Enormous white building in the center of town, not that hard to find. This is what it looks like in the winter. I took that photograph in 2010. At the time, it was the blizzard of the century. I was welcomed into the West Wing. I met my new bosses. We chatted about the visitor's office. And one of them said, I'm now going to walk you over to the East Wing where your office will be. And so here we walked past, that is the Rose Garden, was the Rose Garden, and that is the Oval Office behind the columns there. I think the White House is beautiful in all kinds of weather. We walked through the house itself, my first time setting foot in the White House. I was so thrilled. And then into the East Wing, we walked past the Jacqueline Kennedy Garden, which is the mirror image on the east side. And then I was escorted into the visitor's office where I was introduced to Miss Janet Johnson. We sat down, and I promise you I would never have mentioned that phone call because, come on, it was just too strange, right? But she did. The first thing she said to me was, have you come here from working at Macy's? Yes, actually, are you remembering a phone call from last November? Oh, yes, she said. In fact, when we hung up, I turned to the person who was with me and said, I have just spoken to my replacement. So the universe spoke to her as well. My husband had a design business. He said, obviously the White House furnishes every office, but he said, it's clear you're going to be spending a lot of time there. Let's make it beautiful. So this is my then husband and my son moving some pretty furnishings into my brand new office in the East Wing, which sadly no longer exists. My first presidential event was a presidential helicopter departure, and here I am on the South Lawn. Although I am a Washington native, I will say that the coldest I have ever been and the hottest I have ever been has been doing events out on the South Lawn of the White House. I did not know Hillary before the White House years because for the longest time, once they had Chelsea, if either Bill or Hillary was going to travel, the other parent stayed home with their child. So Bill would come to Washington for Governors Association meetings and other things. And if he had time, we'd have coffee together, we'd catch up, I'd share news about our mutual friends and so forth. I had not met Hillary. All I knew about Hillary Clinton was what I had seen in the media, read in the papers, and she sounded scary, sounded really intimidating. And then I met her. Now, this is Hillary in my office, but I met her because I was invited to come meet her in her office in the West Wing. And imagine my astonishment when I discovered that she was nothing like what we had all been led to believe. She is warm and very funny, has a wicked sense of humor. She's very kind and loyal. Both my parents died during the White House years. I'll never forget her kindnesses to me. Honestly, I am a better person for having had Hillary Clinton as a friend in my life, and this has nothing to do with politics or policy. She's a fabulous person. I'm very grateful to her. All kinds of wonderful perks go along with these jobs. This is my business card. Note the embossed gold seal of the president at the top. And the address. Now, if you write to the White House, that's all you need. You don't need that Pennsylvania Avenue part of the address because the post office knows where the White House is. And my email address was interesting. My email address was my name, melinda.bates, @a1.eop.gov. Now, Washington is a one-industry town, and that industry is government. So everyone pretty much knows all the government acronyms for the government agencies and stuff. Even government people would look at that and say, A1, EOP, what does that stand for? Executive Office of the President. What a thrill it was for me to be able to say that. I will say here that people who are currently important won't tell you this because it would be inappropriate, but since I am no longer important, I feel perfectly free to tell you how much fun it is to be important. It is so much fun. I got invited to the best parties. I got to see things and do things. What a thrill it all was. In March of that first year, I got a call from the Oval. Melinda, will you be in the office around 9 o'clock tonight? Yes, I will. I'm always here quite late. What's going on? The president has invited Judy Collins to come spend the night in the Lincoln bedroom. He thought it would be nice if you would be the person to greet her at the south door and escort her up to the residence. It's 1993, and my friend Bill is remembering that in 1964, I had taken him to his first Judy Collins concert and is returning the favor. So I got to welcome Judy. We went into the house. We went up in my first time in the presidential elevator. It's very beautiful. It's paneled in rosewood, staffed by a butler in white tie and tails. We went up to the residence where I certainly had never been. It's the private home of the first family. Staff doesn't go there. Tourists don't go there. I got her settled in the Lincoln bedroom, and then we were wandering through the cross hall. She saw the piano, sat down, and began to play and sing for me a Chelsea morning, and that was a very special moment. Are there any cat lovers in the room? I have a fabulous dog and a wonderful cat, Mr. Darcy, and Socks was the best cat I have ever known. He was so mellow. You could pick him up and hand him to a stranger, and he would just be calm and happy about it. He never clawed or hissed at anybody, and he had an uncanny affinity for sick and fragile children. We often had special tours and things for sick children. And I once watched him, I was pushing a little girl, a very frail little girl in a wheelchair up the south driveway, and Socks was tethered to a tree on the lawn. And a normal cat, hearing the chatter of the children, would have gotten up and walked into the trees. Socks got up and came over to see what was going on, and he saw this little girl, jumped into her lap and started to purr. He was so special. Are there any engineers in the room? Anybody? There's usually an engineer. No? Well, I believe that the motto of engineers is, if it is worth doing, it is worth overdoing. And so because Socks spent a lot of time in my suite of offices, we could close the outer door, and we had a suite across the north front of the east wing. I thought, we should get a scratching post for the cat. Why don't you call the gift unit? I bet somebody has sent the cat a scratching post. So a staff member called, and they said, oh yeah, we have a scratching post for you. And they sent this contraption covered in red, white, and blue shag carpeting, which I am confident must have been made by an engineer. And the cat loved it. How many of you have seen the annual White House Easter egg roll? Big event on the South Lawn every Easter. Many of you, when I was there, it was an event for 30,000 people in one day. I am the first person they could find in history who was responsible for organizing 8 of them. And out of all the wonderful, exciting, glamorous, thrilling, historical things I got to do at the White House that I would so have loved to get to do again if history had been a little different, this is so hard. This is so hard. I did not miss not doing another Easter egg roll. But the Clintons loved it, and they did it every year. Now, as much fun as it is to do things on campus, as we would say with the president or the first lady, it's also fun to do things off campus. So we are at a Georgetown Hoyas basketball game. Is anybody else here from Georgetown? No? So here I am telling the president a joke, and boy, did he love the Hoyas, the basketball and the football. Now, during the campaign, our classmate Bill had told us all from Georgetown that if he were to win, we would have our regularly scheduled reunion, our class reunion at his house, the White House, and so we did. We had a dinner for 1,700 people, because here's the thing, if your university class gets to have its reunion at the White House, everyone comes. People came out of the woodwork. It's like, who are all these people? But it was really wonderful. And my classmates honored me by saying I should be seated next to the president at dinner. It's a very great honor. At every dinner place setting, there is a program, a beautiful program, a heavy paper, the gold seal, the little gold tassel. And the tradition is that you sign your program, that's me at the top, and then you pass it around the table so that everyone at your table signs it, and there's The president, where's the president? There's the president's signature. He has terrible handwriting. And so when it returns to you, it's a fabulous souvenir. So that was really wonderful. The dinner was just wonderful. And then when dinner was over, the president stood up to go and greet other guests. Well, I stood up also, and I glanced at the table, and I saw his place card. And I thought to myself, well, it's not as if he's going to need it. So I picked it up and put it in my pocket. And my friends had honored me by saying I should present the class gift to the president and the first lady. And I will say, being on the same stage as the two smartest people I will ever know was quite nerve-wracking, but at least my jokes worked. I loved doing events on the lawn because I worked, as glamorous as my work was, there was a lot of just the scut work it takes to be the director of a very important division of the world's most famous house. So anything to get away from my desk and go outside and do events on the lawn was just so welcome. I really loved that. And I had a whole collection of hats that I would wear, and the president always noticed. My second favorite time of the year at the White House is the annual July 4th fireworks viewing. We would invite staff and friends to come and sit on the lawn, listen to the Marine Band play Sousa marches, and I always invited presidential reenactors, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Teddy Roosevelt, Abigail Adams. It was one of my favorite things to do. There are two big events every year at the White House for members of Congress. There is a picnic in the summer, and there's a holiday ball in December. This is one of the invitations to a picnic. The calligrapher's office was, when the East Wing existed, was upstairs from me on the second floor, and they not only do beautiful lettering, but they also are artists. And I'm going to talk more about this and events in the talk I do that's about entertaining at the White House. We're just moving along here now in the first year, and I'm sure many of you will remember this event in October of 1993, the Israeli-Palestinian peace accord signing. This event was decided on a Friday, was going to take place on the White House lawn on Monday morning. We only had the weekend to organize, not a lot of time. There was a lot of stress, all the different entities doing their job to get this going, and apparently over at the State Department, it was a little too stressful because the person responsible for proofreading the program misspelled Israel. That's just such a terrible mistake. So anyway, that morning I was assigned to work at the Southeast Gate with Hanan Ashwari from the Palestinian Authority. And the Secret Service and I said to her, look, we do not know any of the people in your delegation. We rely on you to identify them as they arrive at the gate, so we will admit them. And she said she would. So I'm standing there watching, and people are coming in, she's nodding, and people are going in. And I'm starting to watch, and I think, really? Those just look like random people. So I said to her, really, those people? And she said, oh, no, I've never seen them before in my life. Thank you so much for helping us maintain security. So a crowd started to gather outside the gate, and I was kind of semi-joking and said to one of the Secret Service officers, I'm kind of glad you have a gun. It's getting rowdy here. And he was not joking at all when he said, I do have a gun, and I'm going to close this gate. We are not going to have a riot on my watch. So we closed the gate. We all went in, and on the lawn, everyone, I hope everyone, was watching this happen in the center, on a platform in the center of the lawn. For me, my attention wandered, and I looked back at the house, the south front of the house, where, to my great dismay, I watched a rat the size of a house cat cross in front of the door. Because even at the White House, no matter how carefully you plan, stuff happens. The White House has a birthday. October 13th is the anniversary of the laying of the cornerstone. The year before we arrived, it had been the 200th anniversary. And so the Bush administration had put on a very grand series of events. They had a big fancy dinner. They had symposia with historians and all kinds of fancy stuff going on. Clearly, we were not going to do that for the 201st birthday, but I still thought we should celebrate. And how do you celebrate a birthday? Cake. You have cake, right? So all of that is icing. That is all three-dimensional icing. Every year, one of the president's Navy mess food specialists made a cake with either the north or the south front of the White House in icing. And then they also made sheet cakes for us, which were cut up into squares, so as the tourists left the house in the morning, we could serve them birthday cake. And that became, I love doing things. I'm one of those odd people who really enjoys working with the public, even if they're being not so nice. I just really like it, and I loved being outside and doing those things. Hillary's birthday is at the end of October, so for us it was always a costume party of one kind or another, and this is the first year, and it's a surprise. Shh. It's a surprise. It's a surprise. It's a surprise. Very difficult to keep a secret from the First Lady in her own house. But that day she had been on Capitol Hill lobbying members of Congress for some aspect of the president's agenda. Her car returned to the house, and it was all dark, no lights on, and that never happens. The White House is always beautifully lit up. Her car door was opened by a figure in a hooded cloak and went, shh, and beckoned her into the house. There was a path set in the dark with glow sticks. They walked to the elevator and upstairs, where in her bedroom she found a costume for her to dress as Dolly Madison, and the president at least a foot too tall as James Madison. And that was one of our first very fun parties. As the year moves on, we're getting towards Halloween, we're getting towards Thanksgiving. The mess stewards again carve this pumpkin, and now they're doing, I'm sure, even more elaborate things. And the turkey pardoning, which just happened the other day with President Trump in the Rose Garden. And then my favorite time of year, the December holidays at the White House. Now, there are trees all over the house. Everyone is very interested in the theme that the First Lady has just selected and how the house will be dressed. But the holiday really begins with the delivery of this enormous tree. It comes on a horse-drawn cart, is greeted by the First Lady and usually a couple of children. And it is set up in the Blue Room, where the ceiling is 18 feet high. They remove the chandelier, they take out all the furniture, and this enormous tree is set up. And the first big event is the annual Congressional Holiday Ball. And this gives me an opportunity to tell you how Washington really works. Because I was at the ball with my then husband, and I was looking at the tree, admiring the ornaments. Behind me, I heard my husband say, "Oh, Mr. Gingrich, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm a big fan." Because, yes, I was in a mixed marriage. And in case you don't know what I'm talking about, Mr. Gingrich was a member of the opposition party who loved to go on the floor of the House and say horrible, awful, mean things about us and not a friend to us at all. But I was in a mixed marriage. My husband was a fan, whatever. I'm admiring the tree. Then I heard him say, "Oh, and my mom's from Atlanta. She's a big fan." Whatever. The tree's so lovely. And then I heard Daryl say, "And I'd like you to meet my wife." So, of course, I'm a very polite person. I turned around, and I could see Congressman Gingrich making a face that is so well known in Washington. It is a face that says, "I don't want to be rude here, but you are not really important enough for me to spend time with." I recognize this face. I'm from Washington. I'm not offended by the face. That's just the face. Until my husband says my name. And this is my wife, Melinda Bates. When he says my name, Congressman Gingrich looks up and looks at me and says, "Melinda Bates, you are Melinda Bates?" I said, "Yes." At which point he stepped forward and elbowed my husband out of the way so he could take my hand in both of his and say, "I am so happy to meet you. Your staff is so wonderful to us. They're professional, they're gracious. You know, we didn't know if we'd get tour tickets for our constituents anymore with the change in administration. You've been so kind to us. You've just been so lovely." That's how Washington really works. He hated us. All kinds of celebrities come. I used to encourage them to stand in front of the Kennedy portrait and, stand that way. I really enjoyed Will Smith. But my favorite afternoon, my boss had called me the day before this and said, "Melinda, Robin Williams is going to be the headliner at the DNC Gala tomorrow night. I need you to take him to lunch in the mess and then keep Robin Williams entertained in the afternoon." Okay. I'm going to keep Robin Williams entertained. I'll be right on that. So we had lunch in the wardroom, the private part of the White House mess. And he, was going to perform that night, so he kept trying out political jokes on me. So he would tell me a joke, and then he'd say, "Am I going too far?" And I would say, "Not for me," because it was political. So then we left, and we were walking through the cross hall, and we ran into Dan Aykroyd, who was just there as a random guest of some other person. And I was amazed to discover that Robin Williams was exactly like what we saw in films and on television. His mind never stopped. It was like this. He was constantly thinking things, making connections in just these amazing ways. I thought it must be really exhausting to have a mind like that apparently never shut off. But I did not understand the baggy suit and the clown tie. I mean, it was just weird. And when I say sooner or later everyone comes, Mr. Snuffleupagus and Big Bird, everyone comes sooner or later. Any of you remember Roger Moore as the Saint and an early James Bond? At that time, he was an ambassador for UNICEF, such a lovely man. And one of my favorites, Larry Hagman. Okay, we used to have celebrities autograph Easter eggs because at the egg roll, we would hide these celebrity Easter eggs in a special part, and children could retrieve celebrity-signed Easter eggs. Now, I have a story about Larry Hagman, which, for reasons of propriety, I cannot tell you from the stage. But if you catch me around the ship, I'll tell you that story. He was, let's just say, celebrities are different from you and me. They run on their own rules and their own timetables, and they don't care what anybody else thinks or does. They're just different from you and me. I really became quite fond of Larry Hagman. Are there any NASCAR fans in the room? Anybody? Good for you. Well, I didn't know anything about NASCAR. This was several years later. And I was asked to give a private tour. You know who these are? These are very important NASCAR. Believe me, that's Jeff Gordon. He was such a cutie. And there was Darrell Waltrip and Dale Earnhardt Jr. Well, I knew nothing about NASCAR. It was December. I was super busy. I was asked to give them a private tour. I just didn't have the time. And I mentioned it to a friend who said, "Have you lost your mind? It's the biggest sport in America." What did I know? So I gave them a private tour, and they were quite lovely. Now, I've been able to tell you how glamorous and exciting and amazing my time there was, what an adventure it all was. All of that is true. I've been able to tell you how the universe swung open a door for me in the most miraculous way. All of that is true. But perhaps at this stage of your life, you've had an experience which has shown you that the universe also has a sense of humor. So, December, very busy time at the White House, event. And so in November, I would figure out what all the events were, what I was going to wear to every event, and I would put up a calendar, turn my guest bedroom into a dressing room. And I had a calendar with every event and what I was going to wear, and I would pack different garment bags. So with everything I needed, the gown or the suit, the jewelry, the handbag, the headband, the pantyhose, whatever I needed for that night. So in the morning, I could just pick up a garment bag, take it with me to work, and when it was time to change, I could close my office door and change. And this was, does everybody know who this is? Tony Bennett and Jose Feliciano. And they were the headliners at the annual Pageant of Peace tree lighting. So that day, I had worn a black trouser suit to work, but I was very happy because at night, I was going to wear my favorite red silk Tahari suit. I loved that suit. And so it was time to change the event. The Pageant of Peace tree lighting was over. I ran to my office to change into this outfit that I loved. I took everything out, closed the door, took everything out, including the package of pantyhose, brand new, and discovered to my horror the wrong size. And not the wrong size by a little, the wrong size by quite a lot. But I had to wear them because in those days, ladies did not go out in skirt suits without pantyhose. Now they do, but not in those days. So I had to get them on. So this meant I had to tug and pull and pull and pull and tug. And honestly, if I had a little olive oil in my desk drawer that I could have slathered on my hips, I would have done that. And I did get them up. I did. Sadly, for me, they were not content to stay there. So now I'm walking east and west through the White House with Tony Bennett, Jose Feliciano, but my pantyhose are heading south. And so please believe me, I mean it in the nicest possible way when I say how glad I was. Jose Feliciano is blind. Because every time Tony Bennett turned away, this is what I was doing. You men have no idea, you slender ladies, but if you're curvy, oh my goodness, the universe has a sense of humor. But still, it was the honor of a lifetime. It never got old. It never got ordinary. Every single day, no matter how tired I was, and I was very tired. When I walked up East Executive Avenue and I saw that house gleaming ahead of me, And I prayed that I would do the best job I could possibly do for the president, for my bosses, for the people that worked for me, for the public. Every day it never got old or ordinary. And I know that all of the people I worked with felt the same way. And I believe that the people who have followed us must feel the same way. What an honor to serve in the heart of American public life. And now, those days are long gone for me, but now I get to relive those days by sharing my stories with lovely people like all of you. And I am so grateful for the opportunity to do this. I hope you'll come to my next talk, which will be about Backstage with First Families, presidents, first ladies, and their frequently misbehaving children. And in case you're interested in a memoir, I'm going up to the 8th floor to sign books. So thank you again for coming. Have a beautiful... Oh, wait, and Kevin, Dr. Kevin, is coming up right after me to talk about laughter and the healing effects of laughter. You don't want to miss that. And then later in the afternoon, so we have creativity, we have cartooning, so we have lots of wonderful things in this room for you. Have a glorious and fun afternoon. Thank you so much for coming.